The gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Colorado, as Olivia Zimmerman ran for her life, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1878, and being the daughter of the wealthiest rancher in the territory meant nothing when you were being hunted by the very men your father had hired to protect you. "Get that girl." Vernon Blake's voice boomed behind her. "Your father's paying us good money to make sure you don't run off with that no-good drifter again." Olivia's breath came in ragged gasps as she darted between buildings, the hem of her blue cotton dress catching on a nail and tearing. She didn't care about the dress. She only cared about escaping the three men who were determined to drag her back to her father's ranch and the arranged marriage he had planned for her with Senator Williams, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and wandering hands. "I'd rather die," she whispered to herself as she spotted the large stable at the edge of town. It was her only chance. If she could hide there until nightfall, perhaps she could steal a horse and make her escape. The stable door creaked as she slipped inside, the familiar scent of hay and horses enveloping her. She moved quickly past the stalls, several horses nickering softly at her presence. In the back corner, behind a stack of hay bales, she found a small space to hide. She hadn't been there 10 minutes when the stable doors burst open. "Check every corner," Blake commanded. "She's in here somewhere." Olivia held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. She could hear the men overturning barrels and moving equipment, getting closer with each passing second. "Found something," one of the men called out. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading right to those hay bales. Olivia's heart sank. There was nowhere left to run. Blake's weathered face appeared around the hay bales, a triumphant smile spreading across his features. "There you are, Miss Zimmerman. Your father is mighty worried about you." "My father doesn't worry about me," Olivia spat back. "He only worries about his business arrangements. And I am not property to be traded." Two of the men grabbed her arms, dragging her to her feet. She struggled against their grip, but they were too strong. "Put her in the back room," Blake ordered, "and lock it up tight. We'll send word to Mr. Zimmerman that we've found his wayward daughter." The back room was little more than a tack storage area with a small window too narrow for even Olivia's slender frame to slip through. They shoved her inside, and she heard the heavy wooden bar slide into place outside the door. "You can't keep me here," she shouted, pounding her fists against the rough wooden planks. "This is kidnapping. It's for your own good, miss," Blake called back. "Your father will be here by morning to collect you. I suggest you get comfortable." Olivia slumped against the wall, tears of frustration burning her eyes. At 22, she had spent her entire life under her father's control. After her mother died when she was 12, Gerald Zimmerman had become increasingly obsessed with expanding his cattle empire. Now he saw his only daughter as nothing more than a bargaining chip to secure political connections through marriage. As darkness fell, Olivia could hear the men outside drinking and playing cards, occasionally laughing at her expense. She searched the small room for anything she could use to escape, but there was nothing but old saddles, bridles, and various tools for shoeing horses. "God help me," she whispered, sinking down onto a pile of horse blankets in the corner. "I just wanted freedom." Miles away, across the rolling plains, Preston Xavier urged his horse forward through the gathering dusk. At 26, he had spent the last 5 years drifting across the frontier, working as a ranch hand, occasionally as a deputy when towns needed extra guns, but never staying in one place too long. The war had left him restless, with memories he preferred not to revisit. Tonight, however, he rode with purpose. 2 days ago, in a saloon in Dry Gulch, he'd overheard a conversation between two men, Blake's men, discussing their plans to capture Olivia Zimmerman and return her to her father. Preston had met Olivia 3 months earlier when he'd briefly worked at the Zimmerman ranch. She was unlike any woman he'd ever known, educated, spirited, and determined to live life on her own terms. They had formed a friendship that quickly blossomed into something more, stolen moments behind the barn and whispered promises under starlight. When Gerald Zimmerman discovered their relationship, Preston had been fired on the spot and warned never to return. But not before Olivia had slipped him a note promising to meet him in Silver Creek when she could escape. Now, Preston feared he was too late. The description of the men matched Blake's crew-hired guns who did the dirty work Gerald Zimmerman wouldn't soil his own hands with. As Silver Creek came into view, Preston slowed his horse to a walk and approached cautiously. The town was mostly quiet at this late hour, with only the saloon showing signs of life. He tied his horse behind the general store and moved through the shadows, making his way toward the stable where he and Olivia had planned to meet. From his position across the street, Preston could see 3 men sitting outside the stable doors, a lantern illuminating their card game. Even in the dim light, he recognized Vernon Blake's broad-shouldered silhouette. "Damn," Preston muttered. Getting to Olivia wouldn't be easy with those 3 standing guard. He considered his options. A direct confrontation would be suicide. He was outnumbered and, though skilled with a gun, not foolish enough to take on 3 armed men at once. He circled around to the back of the stable, looking for another way in. The building was solid, built to withstand the harsh Colorado winters. But as he examined the rear wall, he noticed that one section appeared newer than the rest, likely a repair job after last season's brutal storms. Inside her makeshift prison, Olivia had given up on sleep. The night air had grown cold, and the thin blankets provided little warmth. She huddled in the corner, trying to formulate a plan for when her father arrived. Perhaps she could reason with him one last time, make him understand that forcing her into marriage would only guarantee her unhappiness. She was lost in these thoughts when she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the outer wall. At first, she thought it might be a raccoon or some other night creature. But the sound persisted, more deliberate than any animal would make. Curious, she approached the wall, pressing her ear against the rough wood. "Hello," she whispered tentatively. "Olivia." The voice was muffled but unmistakable. Her heart leapt. "Preston? Is that you?" "Stand back from the wall," he instructed. "I'm coming in." Outside, Preston had discovered that the repaired section of wall wasn't as sturdy as it appeared. Using a small pry bar from his saddlebag, he worked at the boards, careful to keep the noise to a minimum. When he had loosened several planks, he returned to his horse. The black gelding was strong and well-trained, a parting gift from a grateful rancher whose daughter Preston had rescued from Apache raiders the previous year. Preston led the horse to the back of the stable, positioning him directly in front of the weakened wall. "This is going to be loud," he warned Olivia through the loosened boards. "When I come through, be ready to run." Inside, Olivia backed away from the wall, her pulse racing with both fear and hope. She could hear Blake and his men still outside the main doors, their voices growing louder as their card game became more heated. Preston mounted his horse and took a deep breath. "Now or never," he murmured, then dug his heels into the gelding's sides, urging him forward at full speed. The sound of splintering wood shattered the night's quiet as Preston and his horse crashed through the stable wall. Boards flew in all directions, and dust billowed up in clouds. Olivia let out a startled cry, shielding her face from the debris. When she looked up, there was Preston, silhouetted against the hole in the wall, his hat pushed back and a smile spreading across his face. "Evening, Miss Zimmerman," he said, extending his hand. "I believe you were looking for a ride out of town." "Preston." She rushed forward, taking his hand and allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. From the front of the stable came shouts and the sound of boots on packed earth. The element of surprise wouldn't last long. "Hold tight," Preston urged, wheeling the horse around. They burst through the opening he'd created just as Blake and his men rounded the corner of the stable, guns drawn. "Stop right there," Blake bellowed, firing a shot that whistled past Preston's ear. Preston didn't slow down, guiding the horse into the cover of darkness, away from town and toward the open plains. Olivia clung to his waist, her face pressed against his back, the wind whipping through her unbound hair. They rode hard for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Finally, when the horse began to tire, Preston slowed to a walk and guided them into a small copse of trees near a creek. "We should be safe here for now," he said, helping Olivia dismount. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. Preston caught her by the elbows, steadying her. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him in the moonlight. "I was beginning to think I'd never escape." Preston tethered the horse to a tree branch and gave it access to the creek. "I overheard Blake's men talking in Dry Gulch. When I didn't find you at our meeting place, I feared the worst. Olivia sat on a fallen log, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled from the wild ride. My father sent them after me. He's arranged for me to marry Senator Williams next month. The senator promised to support father's railroad interests in exchange. Preston's jaw tightened. Williams is twice your age and has buried 2 wives already. I know. Olivia's voice was small. When I refused, father locked me in my room. I escaped through the window 2 nights ago, but Blake and his men caught up with me in Silver Creek. Preston gathered some dry branches and built a small fire, careful to keep it low so the light wouldn't carry far. The night was growing colder, and Olivia was shivering in her thin dress. Here, he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it around her shoulders. We'll rest here tonight and continue at first light. Continue where? Olivia asked. Blake and his men will be searching, and my father won't give up easily. He's not a man who accepts defeat. I know a place, Preston said, sitting beside her. A small ranch near the Colorado-New Mexico border. It belongs to a friend who fought with me in the war. He's gone east to visit family and asked me to look after things while he's away. And you think we'll be safe there? For a while, at least. Preston stared into the small fire. It will give us time to decide what to do next. Olivia studied his profile in the flickering light, the strong jaw, the slightly crooked nose that had been broken at least once, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years under the harsh sun. When they'd first met, she'd been drawn to his quiet strength, so different from the blustering arrogance of the men in her father's circle. Why did you come back for me? She asked softly. You could have been killed. Preston turned to look at her, his eyes serious. Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone worth staying in one place for until you. The simple honesty of his words warmed her more than the fire. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. He responded immediately, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his fingers. When they broke apart, both were breathing a little faster. Preston cleared his throat. We should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. He spread a bedroll on the ground near the fire and insisted Olivia take it while he kept watch. Despite her protests that he needed rest too, she was asleep within minutes, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Preston stayed awake, listening to the night sounds and occasionally adding small branches to the fire. He had no illusions about the danger they faced. Gerald Zimmerman was not only wealthy, but also connected to some of the most powerful men in the territory. And Vernon Blake had a reputation as a man who never failed to complete a job. Just before dawn, Preston woke Olivia. They ate a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, then doused the fire and prepared to leave. Blake will likely have men watching the main trails, Preston said as he helped Olivia mount the horse. We'll have to take the long way around. The long way turned out to be a grueling journey through rough country, steep hillsides, dense thickets, and rocky terrain that slowed their progress considerably. By midday, both Preston and the horse were tiring, so they stopped in a sheltered valley to rest. How much further? Olivia asked, massaging her sore legs. Another day's ride, at least, Preston replied, scanning the horizon. Maybe more, given that we're avoiding the main trails. Olivia nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. Every hour they spent in the open increased their chances of being caught. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from rolling plains to more rugged, pine-covered hills. As evening approached, they came upon a small cabin nestled against a hillside. Trapper's cabin, Preston explained. Abandoned now, but it should provide shelter for the night. The cabin was basic but intact, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a platform bed covered in old furs. Preston checked it thoroughly for unwelcome wildlife before declaring it safe. You take the bed, he said, unsaddling the horse and securing him in a lean-to attached to the cabin. I'll keep watch again. Preston, Olivia said, touching his arm. You need sleep too. The bed is big enough for both of us. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll just check the perimeter once more. While he was gone, Olivia attempted to make the cabin more comfortable, clearing away cobwebs and dust. She found an old broom in the corner and swept the floor, then shook out the furs on the bed. When Preston returned, he built a fire in the fireplace, the warm glow filling the small space. From his saddlebag, he produced a can of beans and a small cooking pot. Not exactly fine dining. He apologized as they shared the simple meal. "It's perfect," Olivia replied, and meant it. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she felt more alive than she had in years. After dinner, exhaustion set in. Preston hung his gun belt within easy reach of the bed, then stretched out beside Olivia, careful to maintain a respectful distance. But as the night grew colder, they naturally gravitated toward each other's warmth. "Preston," Olivia whispered in the darkness. "What happens if they find us?" He was silent for a moment. "I won't let them take you back. My father will never stop looking." "Then maybe we need to go where he can't follow." "Where?" Preston shifted to face her. "California. Or maybe Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh, where the Zimmerman name doesn't mean anything." "You would do that? Leave everything behind?" "What would I be leaving? I've been drifting for years." His hand found hers under the furs. "But with you, I might finally find a reason to put down roots." Olivia's heart swelled with emotion. In the short time she'd known Preston, he'd shown her more consideration and respect than any man ever had. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she confessed. In response, Preston leaned forward and kissed her, not the gentle kiss they'd shared by the campfire, but something deeper, more urgent. Olivia responded with equal fervor, all the tension and fear of the past days channeling into this moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Preston pressed his forehead against hers. "I think I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to your father, telling him you wouldn't be treated like property. You were the bravest person I'd ever seen." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. They ate the last of Preston's provisions, then set out again, the horse refreshed from a night of rest. The day was clear, the sky a brilliant blue above the pine-covered hills. They made good progress, stopping only briefly at midday to rest and water the horse at a small stream. "We should reach Jack's ranch by evening," Preston said as they continued their journey. "It's not much, a small house, a barn, some good grazing land, but it's isolated. Few people even know it exists." Olivia found herself imagining what it would be like to live in such a place, far from society's expectations and her father's controlling influence. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Preston suddenly reined in the horse, his body tensing. "What is it?" Olivia asked, alarmed by his reaction. "Smoke," he said, pointing toward a thin gray column rising in the distance. "That's about where Jack's place should be." They approached cautiously, Preston guiding the horse off the trail and through the trees to avoid being seen. When they reached the edge of the clearing where the small ranch stood, they had an unobstructed view of the scene below. The cabin was intact, but smoke rose from a campfire in the yard. For horses were tethered to the corral fence. And sitting on the porch, rifle across his lap, was Vernon Blake. "How did they know?" Olivia whispered, her heart sinking. Preston's expression was grim. "They didn't. They're guessing, checking every possible place we might go." He scanned the area. "I only see Blake and one other man. The others must be out searching the surrounding area. What do we do now?" Preston was silent for a moment, thinking. "We wait until dark. They'll either leave to continue searching, or they'll settle in for the night. Either way, we'll have a better chance after sunset." They retreated deeper into the trees to wait, the hours stretching endlessly. As darkness fell, they observed Blake and his companion building up the fire and preparing an evening meal. There was no sign of the other men returning. "They're staying," Preston whispered. "We need another plan. Could we go around them? Find another place to hide?" Preston shook his head. "We're low on supplies, and the horse needs proper rest. Besides, Blake's men are probably checking every town and settlement within 50 miles. He stared down at the cabin, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's a root cellar behind the house. Jack stores extra supplies there. If we could reach it unseen, we might be able to resupply and move on before they realize we were here." It was a risky plan, but they had few options. They waited until Blake and his companion entered the cabin, then made their way down the hillside, moving silently through the shadows. Preston left the horse tethered in the trees and led Olivia toward the back of the property. The root cellar was partially dug into the hillside, its wooden doors visible in the moonlight. They had almost reached it when a voice called out from the darkness. "That's far enough, Xavier." Preston pushed Olivia behind him as two men emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. They were the missing members of Blake's crew, returning from their search. "Blake!" one of them shouted toward the cabin. "We got them." The cabin door flew open, and Blake stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Well, he said, descending the steps. "If it isn't the hero and the runaway bride." "She's not going back, Blake," Preston said, his voice steady despite their predicament. Blake laughed. "That's not your decision to make, boy. Mr. Zimmerman is paying good money to see his daughter safely returned and to see you dealt with permanently." Olivia stepped out from behind Preston. "If you harm him, I'll never cooperate. You'll have to drag me back kicking and screaming, and I'll tell everyone who will listen how my father's men murdered an innocent man." Blake considered her for a moment. "You've got spirit, Miss Zimmerman, but your father's patience is wearing thin. He's offered $1,000 for your return and $500 for Xavier's head." "Money can't buy happiness, Blake," Preston said. "Surely even you can see that forcing a woman to marry against her will is wrong." "Right and wrong don't pay the bills," Blake replied, but there was a flicker of something doubt, perhaps in his eyes. In that moment of hesitation, Preston made his move. He lunged for one of the men, grabbing his gun arm and forcing it upward. A shot rang out, the bullet harmlessly flying into the night sky. Chaos erupted. Olivia screamed as the second man grabbed her, trying to drag her toward the horses. She fought back, kicking and struggling with all her might. Preston grappled with his opponent, the two men crashing to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, each fighting for control of the gun. Another shot exploded, and the man beneath Preston went limp. Blake raised his rifle, aiming at Preston. "That's enough," he shouted. Preston froze, slowly raising his hands. The man holding Olivia tightened his grip on her arm. "You've just killed Jim," Blake said, his voice cold. "Mr. Zimmerman might have wanted you alive for questioning, but I think I'll tell him you died resisting capture." "Wait," Olivia cried. "Please, Blake. I'll go with you willingly. I'll marry the senator. Just don't hurt Preston." Blake's eyes narrowed. "That's more like it. Bennett, tie Xavier up. We'll decide what to do with him later." As Bennett moved toward Preston, reaching for a rope on his belt, a new voice cut through the night. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All heads turned toward the sound. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a group of riders, at least 10 men, all armed. "Sheriff Thompson," Blake said, recognition and wariness in his voice. "This doesn't concern you or your men." The sheriff, a tall man with a silver mustache, dismounted and approached. "When there's gunplay in my county, it becomes my concern, Blake." He looked from Preston to Olivia, then back to Blake. "Now, someone want to tell me what's happening here?" Before Blake could speak, Olivia stepped forward. "These men were hired by my father to force me to return home and marry a man against my will. They've threatened to kill Preston Xavier, the man I actually love, if I don't comply." Sheriff Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Is that right, Blake? You're in the kidnapping business now." "It's not kidnapping," Blake protested. "She's Gerald Zimmerman's daughter, and she ran away. He hired us to bring her back, that's all." "Miss Zimmerman," the sheriff said, turning to Olivia. "How old are you?" 22, Sheriff. "Then you're a grown woman, free to make your own choices." He faced Blake again. "Seems to me you and your men are the ones doing the kidnapping." Blake's face darkened. "Zimmerman won't take kindly to your interference, Thompson. He has friends in high places." "So I've heard. But out here, the law is the law." The sheriff gestured to his deputies. "Take their weapons, boys." Blake looked like he might resist, but as the deputies closed in, he slowly lowered his rifle. The remaining member of his crew followed suit. "You're making a mistake," Blake warned. "Zimmerman will come after her himself." "Let him," the sheriff replied. "And if he breaks the law in my county, he'll answer for it just like anyone else." He turned to Preston and Olivia. "You two all right?" Preston nodded, moving to Olivia's side and putting an arm around her shoulders. "Yes, sir. Thank you for your timely arrival." "Don't thank me," Thompson said. "Thank Jack Edwards. He sent a telegram saying you might be headed to his place, and that there might be trouble following you. I figured it was worth checking out." Preston smiled. Jack always did have good instincts. The sheriff's men took Blake and his companion into custody, while others examined the body of the man Preston had fought with. "Self-defense, from what I saw," Thompson declared. "But I'll need both of you to come into town tomorrow and give official statements." "Of course," Preston agreed. "But if it's all right with you, we'd like to stay here tonight. It's been a long journey." The sheriff nodded. "I'll leave a deputy here, just in case Blake has more men in the area." He studied the couple for a moment. "You two should know that Gerald Zimmerman isn't a man who gives up easily." "We know," Olivia said, leaning into Preston's embrace. "But neither are we." After the sheriff and his men departed, taking Blake and his surviving companion with them, Preston and Olivia finally entered the small ranch house. It was modest but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 small bedrooms. "It's perfect," Olivia declared, looking around with appreciation. Preston built a fire while Olivia found supplies in the kitchen and prepared a simple meal. They ate by firelight, the events of the past days catching up with them in waves of exhaustion. "What happens now?" Olivia asked as they sat side by side on the small sofa. "We give our statements to the sheriff tomorrow," Preston replied. "After that," he took her hand. "It depends on what you want, Olivia." "I want to be with you," she said without hesitation. "Whether that's here or in California or at the ends of the earth." Preston smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "Jack wrote that he might be gone for several months. We could stay here, see if ranch life suits us. If your father comes looking, we'll deal with that when it happens. And if it doesn't suit us, then we'll find something that does. Together." The next morning, they rode into the small town of Pine Ridge to give their statements to Sheriff Thompson. The sheriff's office was a simple wooden building on the main street, the jail cells visible through a barred window at the back. Blake glared at them from behind the bars as they entered, but said nothing. Thompson took their statements officially, writing everything down in his ledger. "Blake and his man will be charged with kidnapping and attempted murder," he informed them. "The circuit judge comes through in 2 weeks. Until then, they'll stay as my guests." "And my father?" Olivia asked. "I've sent a telegram informing Gerald Zimmerman that his men are in custody and explaining the charges. I also made it clear that any attempt to force you to return against your will would be met with similar charges against him." Thompson closed his ledger. Whether that deters him remains to be seen. As they prepared to leave, the sheriff handed Preston a sealed envelope. "This came for you this morning." Preston opened it, reading quickly, then passed it to Olivia. It was from Jack Edwards, officially giving Preston permission to use the ranch as long as needed, and offering him first right to purchase it when Jack returned. "It seems your friend wants to settle in Virginia permanently," Olivia observed. Preston nodded. "His family's been after him to come home for years." He looked thoughtful. "I never considered owning my own place before. Always figured I'd keep drifting. And now," he smiled at her, "now I have a reason to stay in one place." They returned to the ranch and spent the next week settling in, cleaning the house thoroughly and familiarizing themselves with the property. It was larger than Preston had initially described, nearly 100 acres of good grazing land with a year-round stream running through it. Jack was doing well here, Preston commented as they walked the boundaries one afternoon. "Better than he let on in his letters. Do you think we could make a go of it?" Olivia asked. She had never considered herself a rancher's wife, but the idea was growing on her with each passing day. "With hard work, yes." Preston stopped, turning to face her. "But Olivia, you should know that this life isn't easy. It's not the comfort you're used to." She laughed. "The comfort I was used to came with a cage. I'd rather have freedom and hard work than luxury and chains." She gestured to the open land around them. "Besides, I'm not entirely useless. I can learn." Preston pulled her into his arms. "I never thought you were useless. In fact, I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." 2 weeks passed, and word came that Blake and his man had been tried and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. There had been no response from Gerald Zimmerman to the sheriff's telegram. "Maybe he's finally accepted that he can't control me anymore," Olivia suggested as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Preston wasn't convinced. "Men like your father don't give up easily. Be prepared for him to make another attempt." His prediction proved accurate. 3 days later, as they were working in the vegetable garden behind the house, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Gerald Zimmerman himself rode at the head of a group of 6 men, all armed. He reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, his face a mask of controlled anger as he surveyed the scene. His daughter in a simple cotton dress, dirt on her hands from planting, Preston Xavier standing protectively beside her. "Olivia," Zimmerman said, his voice carrying across the yard. "It's time to come home." Olivia straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am home, Father." Zimmerman's jaw tightened. "This is no life for you, digging in the dirt like a common laborer, living with a man who isn't your husband, bringing shame to our family name." "The only shame I see," Olivia replied steadily, "is a father who would sell his daughter to advance his business interests." Zimmerman dismounted, handing the reins to one of his men. "Senator Williams has withdrawn his offer of marriage in light of your situation. But there are other arrangements that can be made, other alliances to be formed." "I'm not interested in any arrangements," Olivia said. "I've made my choice." Zimmerman's gaze shifted to Preston. "And you? You think you can take my daughter, ruin her reputation, and get away with it?" Preston met his stare evenly. "I didn't take anything." Olivia chose to leave. She chose freedom over being treated like property. She chose a life of poverty with a drifter, Zimmerman scoffed. "No," Olivia interjected. "I chose love and respect over wealth and subjugation." She moved to stand beside Preston, taking his hand. "And Preston isn't a drifter anymore. This is our home now." Zimmerman's face flushed with anger. "You're coming with me, Olivia, one way or another." He signaled to his men, who began to dismount. Preston tensed, ready for a fight, but Olivia squeezed his hand. "Wait," she said quietly, then addressed her father again. "Before you do something you'll regret, there's something you should know." She took a deep breath. "Preston and I were married by the circuit preacher last week, when he came through Pine Ridge." It was a lie. They had discussed marriage, but had not yet taken that step. But Olivia knew her father well enough to understand that he respected certain boundaries, even in his anger. Zimmerman froze, his expression fluctuating between disbelief and fury. "You're lying." "We have a certificate in the house," Preston said, quickly catching on to Olivia's strategy. Sheriff Thompson witnessed it himself. The mention of the sheriff made Zimmerman hesitate. He had clearly heard about what happened to Blake and his men. "Even if that's true," Zimmerman said, his voice lower now, "you can't possibly believe this. This ranch hand can provide for you. Winter's coming. Do you think love will keep you warm when the food runs out and the snow piles up to the windowsills?" "We'll manage," Olivia replied. "And if we struggle, it will be our struggle, not something we can blame on each other. That's what partnership means, Father. Something you never understood with Mother." The mention of his late wife seemed to strike a nerve. Zimmerman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see you living like this." "No," Olivia said gently. "Mother would be happy to see me with a man who respects me, who sees me as a partner, not a possession. She always told me to follow my heart." For a long moment, Zimmerman was silent, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he turned to his men. "Wait for me at the road." When they hesitated, he barked, "Go." After they had withdrawn, Zimmerman approached Olivia, stopping a few feet away. "You're as stubborn as she was," he said, and there was something like grudging admiration in his voice. "I learned from both of you," Olivia replied. Zimmerman studied Preston. "If you hurt her, if she ever wants for anything, she won't," Preston interrupted. "And this isn't about her wanting for things. It's about her having the freedom to choose her own path." Zimmerman nodded slowly. "Perhaps I have been rigid in my thinking." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he held out to Olivia. "Your mother's jewelry. She would have wanted you to have it." Olivia took the pouch with trembling hands. "Thank you. There's money in there too," Zimmerman added gruffly. "Not a fortune, but enough to help you through the winter." He cleared his throat. "Consider it a belated wedding gift." Olivia blinked back tears, surprised by this unexpected gesture. "Father, I don't," Zimmerman cut her off. "I'm not saying I approve of your choices. But you're a grown woman, and your mother always said I held on too tight." He glanced around the property. "This land has potential. Don't waste it." With that, He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting up with the dignity of a man who had made his decision. "I'll expect a letter occasionally," he called over his shoulder. "Just so I know you're alive." As they watched him ride away to join his men, Preston put his arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Did that just happen?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. Olivia leaned into him, clutching the pouch of jewelry. "I think so. Though I'm not entirely sure he believes we're actually married." "About that," Preston said, turning to face her, "I think we should make an honest woman of you as soon as possible, just in case your father decides to check our story." Olivia laughed. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Xavier?" "The most awkward one in history, I imagine," he replied with a smile. "But yes, Miss Zimmerman, I'm asking you to marry me not because of your father or because of what anyone else might think, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." Olivia's answer was to throw her arms around his neck and kiss him thoroughly, the pouch of jewelry still clutched in one hand. They were married 2 days later by the circuit preacher, who had indeed returned to Pine Ridge. Sheriff Thompson stood as witness, as they had claimed to Olivia's father. "Now it's not a lie anymore," Olivia whispered as they exchanged simple gold bands purchased with a small portion of her mother's legacy. That winter was indeed harsh, with snow piling nearly to the windowsills, just as Gerald Zimmerman had predicted. But the newly married couple was prepared, with a well-stocked root cellar, a barn full of hay for the livestock, and each other for warmth. By spring, Olivia had proven herself as capable a rancher as any man, learning quickly and bringing her own ideas to their small operation. They expanded the vegetable garden, added a few dairy cows to their small herd of beef cattle, and began planning improvements to the house. True to her word, Olivia wrote to her father monthly. His replies were brief but increasingly cordial. By summer, he had even included business advice that proved valuable as they negotiated the sale of their first calves. On the first anniversary of the day Preston had ridden through the stable wall to rescue her, Olivia had a special announcement for her husband as they sat on their porch, watching another spectacular sunset. "I hope you're ready for a new adventure," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We'll have a new ranch hand arriving in about 7 months." Preston's face transformed with wonder as he understood her meaning. "A baby?" "We're having a baby." Olivia nodded, her heart full as she watched joy spread across his features. "I was thinking, if it's a boy, we could name him Jack, after your friend who gave us this place. And if it's a girl, perhaps Eliza, after my mother." Preston gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Either way, our child will grow up knowing what real freedom means and what love can accomplish." As darkness fell over their small ranch, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a locked stable to a home filled with love and possibility. Sometimes, she thought, the most unexpected rescues lead to the most beautiful beginnings.